Hello and welcome. I'm Yuki. Most people spend years preparing for retirement. They work out the numbers, they check the pension, they think about whether there will be enough. And then it arrives, and for a great many people, something happens that nobody warned them about. The money is more or less fine, but the days go strangely quiet. Nobody is expecting you anywhere. Nobody notices whether you got up. And that turns out to be much harder than anyone mentions beforehand. Where I grew up in Japan, people do stop working, but they very rarely stop being needed. And I think that's a completely different thing. So instead of asking whether you'll have enough to retire, I'd like to ask you something else today. Who is expecting you on Tuesday? Let me show you what I mean. Let's begin. I want to start with something you'd see on any weekday morning in a Japanese neighborhood. At about 7:30 at a road junction near the school, there's an older person standing with a small green flag. They aren't paid, in most cases. They're a neighbor, usually well past 70. And when the children come along in their little groups, the flag goes out, the traffic stops, and every single child says good morning to them by name. That's the whole job. 20 minutes, twice a day. But hold on to that flag, because everything I'm going to say comes back to it. That person has a place to be, a time to be there, and about 40 children who would notice immediately if they weren't. Something happens before any of that, though, and it sets the tone for the whole thing. When a person turns 60 here, the family throws a party called Kanreki. The old calendar ran in cycles of 60 years. So turning 60 means you've completed one full round and are starting again. The person is given a red cap and a red waistcoat, red because that's what babies traditionally wore. They are, in a gentle and slightly teasing way, being called newborn. Now, it's mostly a bit of fun, and plenty of 60-year-olds find the red hat faintly ridiculous. But look at what the ceremony is quietly saying. Not well done, you're nearly finished. It says you've completed something, and now you begin the second one. I think a great deal depends on which of those two stories you're told at 60, and by everyone around you. If the message is that you're winding down, you tend to wind down. If it's that a new cycle has just started, you look around for what to do with it. There's a formal version of this too, and it surprised me when I first learned how organized it is. Most towns here have a center that finds part-time local work specifically for people over 60. They're called Silver Human Resource Centers. You register, and you get matched with small jobs around the area, trimming hedges, caretaking at a car park, helping at a community hall, tidying a park. The pay is modest, and that isn't really the point of it. The point is that somebody rings you and says they need you on Thursday. It's treated as completely normal, not charity, and not a sad thing for people who couldn't afford to stop. Just a sensible bit of civic plumbing that keeps thousands of older people attached to their own town. You see the same idea without any organization behind it in the small shops. A great many are still run by people in their 70s and 80s. The tiny vegetable shop, the stationery shop that has been there for 50 years, the little farm plot at the edge of town. The hours get shorter. Somebody younger carries the heavy boxes now. But the shop opens, and what's really being kept open isn't the business. Half of them can barely be making money. It's the reason to unlock the door at 8 and the stream of people who come through it and say your name. Work here tends to soften and shrink rather than stop dead on a Friday afternoon. That gradual slope is, I think, far kinder than a cliff. Quick pause. If that gentler slope interests you, my ebook, The Quiet Reset, has a simple weekly exercise for rebuilding life after work. It's the first link in the description. Now, back to the street itself. Then there's the street itself, which quietly runs on older people. Most neighborhoods have a residents association. We call it a chonaikai. Somebody has to organize the summer festival. Somebody keeps the rota for the rubbish collection point and tidies it after the crows have been at it. Somebody walks the fire patrol in winter, tapping wooden clappers to remind everyone to check their stoves. These jobs are unpaid, slightly tedious, and often quietly resented. They're also the reason a street knows itself, and they very often land with the people who have just stopped working, because they're the ones with time. Which means the moment your working life ends, the neighborhood hands you something else to be responsible for. So let me say plainly what I think is really going on here, because I don't think this is about Japan being wiser. A job quietly supplies three things that have nothing to do with money: a reason to get up at a particular hour, a place where you are supposed to be, and people who would notice if you didn't turn up. Retirement usually takes all three away on the same afternoon. And nobody warns you, because on paper, you've just been given a wonderful thing: freedom and time. What you actually get is a day with no shape and nobody in it. That's why the answer isn't more leisure. A holiday is lovely precisely because it's a break from being needed. Make it permanent and it stops working. What people seem to need is the opposite: something small that has to be done at a set time that somebody else is counting on. It doesn't have to be big. A flag at a crossing is enough. There's a word here for the smallest version of that, and you may have heard it: Ikigai. It means roughly the reason you get up in the morning. It's become a very grand idea abroad: charts and diagrams about finding your life's purpose. Here it's much more ordinary and much smaller than that. When researchers have asked very old people in Okinawa what theirs is, the answers are things like their vegetable garden, or teaching a craft on Wednesdays, or a friend they walk with. That's the useful bit, I think. Your ikigai is not supposed to be a calling. It just has to be specific, and it has to expect you. The garden needs watering, whether you feel like it or not, and that turns out to be its entire value. There's a lot of organized company for older people here, too, and some of it is charmingly specific. Most areas have a seniors club, Rojin Kurabu, that does outings, exercise mornings, craft afternoons. And there's a sport called gateball, which was invented in Japan and is played almost entirely by older people. It's a bit like croquet, played in teams on a small pitch in the park most mornings. I used to find it slightly comical as a child. I understand it much better now. It isn't really about the sport at all. It's a team, which means people are relying on you to show up, and it happens at a fixed hour, which means your Tuesday has a shape. A hobby you do alone at home when you feel like it does not do that job. The other thing people carry into old age here is a practice, and it's usually one they've had for decades: calligraphy, pottery, flower arranging, a haiku circle that meets once a month. There's a quiet idea inside all of these, which is that you never actually finish. They're called ways: the way of tea, the way of writing, and the whole assumption is that you go on getting better until you stop. Nobody masters them and retires from them. So a person of 75 is not somebody who used to do calligraphy. They're somebody who is still improving at it, with a teacher and a group and a small exhibition in the spring that they have to be ready for. My grandmother took up a new style of embroidery in her 70s, simply because it caught her eye in a shop window, and she was still happily puzzling over it years later. And there's a step beyond that one, which may be the most important role of all. At some point, the person who has done a thing for 40 years becomes the person who teaches it. The retired carpenter shows a younger one how to sharpen a chisel properly. The woman who has made pickles her whole life is the one the neighbors ask when theirs go wrong. Somebody runs the children's calligraphy class on a Saturday morning for almost no money. What's really happening there is a change of job rather than an ending of one. You stop being the person who does it fastest, and you become the person who knows why it's done that way. And that second role has no retirement age at all. It usually gets more valuable the older you are, which is close to the opposite of what most working life tells us. If you've spent decades getting good at something, there is almost certainly somebody nearby who would like to be shown. Family fits into this differently as well. Grandparents here often have a real, scheduled job with the grandchildren, not just visits. They collect them from school on certain days. They mind them while both parents work. They cook, and they're the ones the child comes to with a scraped knee. That's a serious responsibility, and it comes with all the tiredness that implies. I don't want to make it sound sweet. But being genuinely relied upon by a small person is one of the strongest reasons to get out of bed that exists. There's a very big difference between being visited and being needed, and I think everyone can feel which side of that line they're on. And then there's the simplest one of all, which happens at 6:30 in the morning in parks all over the country. A group of mostly older people gather and do a few minutes of gentle stretches together, along to a familiar broadcast. I've mentioned Radio Taiso before, but I want to point at a different part of it now. Not the exercise, the gathering. It's every morning, at the same time, in the same place, with the same people. Nobody signs up and nobody is in charge. But if you didn't come for 3 days, somebody would ask after you. That is an extraordinary thing to have, and it costs nothing at all. And it's a version of it that almost any neighborhood in the world could copy tomorrow. There's one more piece, and it's the one an individual can arrange for themselves. Once a year in September, there's a national holiday called Respect for the Aged Day. Schools and local councils do things for it. Children make cards. Some towns give a small gift to everyone over a certain age. It's a public holiday, so it can be a bit formulaic, and I won't pretend everybody finds it moving. But the message underneath it is stated out loud, once a year, by the whole country, that older people are worth something, and that this is not a stage of life to apologize for. When the surrounding culture tells you that quietly and constantly, it is a great deal easier to believe about yourself. That part can't be borrowed from a video. It can only be practiced on the older people already around you. Now I have to be honest with you, because this could easily become a rose-tinted picture, and the truth is harder. Japan has real and serious problems with old age. There is genuine poverty among older people, and plenty of the ones still working at 75 are doing it because they must, not because it gives them purpose. Isolation is a real problem too. There's a word here, kotokushi, for people who die alone at home and aren't found for a long time. That word exists because it happens, and the traditions I've described are thinning. The residents' associations struggle to find volunteers. Many older people live far from their grandchildren now, exactly as elsewhere. So this isn't a country that has solved growing old. It's a country that happens to have kept some ordinary structures, a flag, a club, a rota, a mourning group, that give a person somewhere to be. Those structures are the borrowable part, and you don't need Japan to build one. I should add that there's no shame at all in simply resting, either. If you have worked for 40 years, and what you want is a quiet garden and nothing scheduled, that is completely legitimate, and I'm not here to tell anyone their retirement is wrong. This is only for the people who find the quiet heavier than they expected. So let me lay it out simply. The things that make retirement hard are rarely financial. They're these: nobody expecting you, no fixed hour to be anywhere, no one who would notice your absence, and a slow drift from being relied upon to being visited. And the things that help are surprisingly small. Something at a set time each week, a group where your absence is noticed, a task that other people are counting on, even a tiny one, a practice you're still getting better at rather than one you used to do. And someone, ideally somebody younger, who genuinely needs you for something. If you take one question with you, take the one from the beginning. Who is expecting you on Tuesday? If the honest answer is nobody, that is worth solving now. And it's much easier to solve before the last day of work than a year afterwards. Which brings me back to that person on the corner with the small green flag. 20 minutes, twice a day, unpaid, in the rain as well as the sun. Nobody would call that a retirement plan, but he has a place to be at 7:30 and 40 children who say good morning to him by name, and I have never once seen him look like a man with nothing to do. You don't need a flag. You need one small thing at a set time that somebody else is depending on. That's the whole of it. If this helped you think differently about what retirement really needs to include, subscribe to the channel for more conversations like this. Thank you for spending this time with me. Take care of yourself, and I'll see you next time.